Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So good to have you with us here in this study on the book of Daniel. We'll be studying in chapter 8, the rise of the little horn, of the ram and the shaggy goat. And this is messages for October 22nd, 2023, but you can listen to it anytime that you wish. And so let's open our Bibles to Daniel chapter 8, and we will see as it starts out, it says, in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar. Now, if you look at chapter 7, it says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. And if you look at Daniel chapter 5, there's a 5 in there someplace. Yes, it says, Belshazzar, king, held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and this was the end of his reign. So he reigned 11 years, something in that neighborhood, and so chapter 5 is the end of his kingdom, and chapter 7 is the first year of his kingdom, and chapter 8 is the third year of his kingdom. So these are out of order. There's some logical reason, as I explained in previous sermons, as to why the end of his kingdom is chapter 5, and then chapter 7 and 8, first and third years of his kingdom, are later, but actually they're earlier. Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to start on this passage. And it says here, the king's vision appeared to me in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar the king. A vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously, chapter 7, 2 years earlier. I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, kind of transported, maybe in vision, over to the citadel of Susa, which is the capital of Persia, modern-day Iran, as far as the geographical location, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside Ulai Canal. Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram, which had 2 horns, was standing in front of the canal. So, this ram is standing in front of the canal there in Persia, helps identify this ram. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. Well, that's kind of parallel to that bear that was lifted up on one side, and was dominant on the one side, which later becomes Persia. And so this Medo-Persian Empire, which will possibly be identified in verse 20 as Medo-Persia, has a dominant horn of the Medo-Persian Empire, which is the Persian aspect of it. Cyrus the Great gains ascendancy. I saw the ram butting westward. This is from the Ulai Canal area in Susa, westward and northward and southward. Remember, it said devour much meat and have 3 ribs in the bear's mouth, which this is parallel to. And so these 3 directions, this was the conquering of Turkey, the Lydian Empire. They also Iraq, Babylon, and then finally south to Egypt. So it fits pretty well, and these directions. And no other beast could stand before him, nor was there any one to rescue from his power. But he did as he pleased and magnified himself. So that's the little snippet on this ram with the two horns. And there is also an interpretation in verse 20, and it says, "The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia." So if you just keep that to Bible study, you will be able to eventually identify the bear that was up on one side with the three ribs in its teeth and stomping and very powerful, and he devoured much flesh. And now this ram with the two horns, and one horn is dominant, and Medo-Persia location, and then it says it's Medo-Persia, and then it goes toward the north and toward the south and toward the west. And so these are the three areas, a great empire, and no one could stand up against him. This great empire did meet sort of its Waterloo at Thermopylae. They actually crossed the Hellespont rather, into Greece, and 300 Spartans were there and stopped them, or at least slowed them up. And so there was great battles going on. Then there is a vision of this shaggy male goat. And it starts here in verse 8. "While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west." That would be the Greece area, as you'll find out. "Over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes." Now, normally goats have two horns, but this one had a conspicuous horn in the middle of his forehead between his two eyes, more like a kind of a unicorn type looking thing, but it was a goat. And it was very, very fast. It didn't even touch the ground. Now this corresponds to the four beasts, and the third beast, which is a leopard, and it had four wings. And of course, normally a bird has two wings, but this leopard had four, so it was very swift. And then it had four heads. And this will come about in this particular vision too, in a slightly different imagery. And it says in verse 6, "He came up to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath." Alexander the Great had approximately 40,000 in his army. There was 10 times that in the Persian army, but they had this system of spears, and they had one row with shields, and then spears, and then behind them would be another row with a longer spear, and behind him another row with even longer spears, and they would take their shields and they would put them up over their head, and it'd be like a turtle, and even they shot arrows at them, they couldn't stop them, and all these points were coming at them. And then they were able to replace anybody that got killed in the front, and they would just march forward, and it was really a very devastating type of way of fighting that they had developed over in Greece, fighting with the Spartans, and these Spartans had lived for war. And so they had this highly developed way with the spears, the shields, and a short sword to jab, and they were just practically incredibly invincible. They were lean and mean. And then also there was the horse cavalry that Alexander the Great used expertly. Very great tactician. He was swift and powerful. He could take care of an army 10 times his size. And so he came across the Hellespont into Turkey, and there he first met the Persian army. And this is Every Man's Bible Commentary on Daniel by John C. Whitcomb, a professor of mine when I went to seminary. Says Alexander's first victory against the Persians was at the Granicus River near the Hellespont. That's the fancy term for that gap between Turkey and Greece. And after taking all of Asia Minor, he crushed the army of Darius the third of Medo-Persia in northern Syria at the Battle of Issus in 333. So he defeated them at the Hellespont in 334, at the Granicus River, and then he defeated them at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. And then the island fortress of Tyre. Tyre used to be an island, and they were a city-state, and they were built entirely upon their trade and their navy. And they were very formidable, and Alexander the Great had tried to get rid of them by building a causeway out to that island a half a mile off the coastline. Well, he ran out of dirt, ran out of patience. He didn't get all the way there. Well, some hundreds of years later, Alexander the Great finished the job and defeated Tyre. And so that meant that there was nobody on his flank. And then he went down, and Egypt didn't put up a fuss and just surrendered to him, and he built Alexandria. And then he came back, and of course the Jews were on his side too, didn't fight with him, and he continued on then. And they acclaimed him deity in Egypt, and he had a third battle with Darius III and defeated him at Gaugamela. And Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana fell before him in 330. By now, Darius III had been murdered. Can't have 4 losses like that. And they murdered him. And Alexander pushed his armies into Bactria and Sogdiana down through what is modern Afghanistan to the borders of India. There, in his final great battle, he overcame the war elephants of King Porus and led his exhausted and discontented troops back to Susa, and which is where the vision is that Daniel had in Susa. And so there's all these things going on, and I'm laying aside the history of what actually happened, along with what is said in the Bible, and of course they're 100% in tandem. And then what happened was that this great empire of 1.5 million square miles, at the zenith of his power, just at the age of 33, and he had lived riotously, drinking and wounded and all kinds of things, and he died at 33 years of age. And there were 4 generals. They were named Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Antigonus. But Antigonus, who was kind of the ruler over Babylon area, he had an underling named Seleucus who eventually defeated him. And Seleucus then took over the Babylon area and Syria, and he became a very, very dominant king. And so as the 4 generals divided up the kingdom of Alexander the Great toward the 4 directions, and one named Ptolemy took over Egypt, and then Cassander, he wanted to go back home, and so he went to Greece, and that's what he took. And Lysimachus, he took Asia Minor area and the Lydian Empire that Persia had defeated, and they had the Asia Minor area, mostly Turkey, and then Seleucus. He was the one that overcame Antigonus, and he had Syria, part of eastern Turkey, he had Babylon, and he had Iran, and he was really a force to be reckoned with. And his desire was to take over Egypt, and of course between Egypt and Israel, and between Egypt and Syria, where he reigned, was the football field of Israel. And so they would go back and forth over this, and finally Israel got dominated by them. And he was there was a very great king, the 8th king, and he was called Antiochus Epiphanes the 4th. And he was very domineering. He wanted to make everything Greek. And so when it came to the Jews who were resistant to him, he eventually got to the point where he would interfere with their religion, and he would steal the things from their temple, and he eventually sacrificed a sow on their altar. He didn't want them to circumcise, and he tried to interfere with their Sabbaths. And Maccabees, they were incensed about this, and they started to fight him. And so Antiochus Epiphanes was the 8th king of this dynasty, and he was the despicable person of Daniel 11:21. And so that's as much as I want to share with that at this time. I'll come back to it here for another reference. So you had this goat, and he had a conspicuous horn, and his feet didn't touch the ground. It was a he-goat, and just in a matter of a very short period of time, he conquered this Medo-Persian Empire. And then, very quickly, he died, and then the 4 horns came up after him and divided up his kingdom. Well, let's continue reading here. Verse 7. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him, and he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns. And the ram had no strength to withstand him, so he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of the heavens. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn. So from these 4 horns that were from Alexander the Great's kingdom, there came up a conspicuous small horn. Reading in verse 8, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, Egypt, and toward the east would be Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and toward the beautiful land. Now that means Israel. It grew up to the host of heaven, and caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. Now, there's 2 views here. Stars can refer to angelic beings. Very curious. But it also can refer to the nation of Israel. When Joseph had his dream of the sun and the moon and the stars, and they bowed down to him, that seemed to indicate that the sun and the moon were mom and dad, and the stars were his brothers, and so this imagery is taken up in Revelation chapter 12, and so we know that this is a reference to Israel. Could be that, or it could be the stars of heaven. There's something going on behind the scenes, if you know what I mean. Satanic power. I am persuaded that this is likely talking about Israel. And it says here, caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, probably in reference to the God that Israel worshipped. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. So this is what this little horn did. And Antiochus Epiphanes IV did this. Verse 12, and on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground to perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings. Well, that means days, 2,300 days. The holy place will be properly restored. And there was Maccabees, Judas Maccabees, and they fought against him, and they were able to defeat his armies, and so he was pushed back, and they restored the temple, and that's considered on that 2,300th day, because even though he had sacrificed a sow on the altar, taken some of the articles from the temple, and tried to stop their sacrifices, tried to stop them from circumcision and even observing their holy days. He had desecrated the temple, and it took that long to rebuild it and sanctify it again, 2,300th day. Well, verse 15. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of Ulai, and he called and said, Gabriel. That's interesting. There's somebody else that is saying to this angel Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So it's very, very interesting. Gabriel's first angel mentioned in the Bible, although a case could be made for Lucifer, Satan, but there's Gabriel. Then later in this book of Daniel, there's another angel mentioned, Michael, the archangel. So now you have three angels by the end of Daniel that are mentioned: the fallen angel, Lucifer. We also know as Satan and the red dragon, and also we have Gabriel. Now Gabriel was the one that talked to Mary and Joseph some hundreds, 600 years later. So angelic being, and then Michael figures in a lot to be the protector of the nation of Israel. But that's a side note. A whole sermon could be preached on that, but I'm not going to do that. So Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened. That's how angels will affect you. And fell on my face, but he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. So, this is very interesting. This is talking particular time stamp of Greece and what happens within it, but there's also some type of understanding that pertains to the time of the end, kind of a dual fulfillment. So there is this aspect that it actually, this little horn is talking about a man named Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who sacrificed a sow on the altar, desecrating the temple, and he made himself out to be like a god, and he tried to interfere with the temple sacrifices and the Jewish people and dominate them and claim that he's God and that he should be worshipped. He's an actual person. But then there's also an aspect that this kind of foreshadows a future Antichrist who will do something quite similar. And that's something you have to keep in mind. Now, it says here in verse 18, "Now while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand upright. He said, 'Behold, I am going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end.'" So now this is going to be an emphasis that kind of transports from the future time that's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes to a future time beyond that, to the time of the end, because we know in the visions of the head of gold and then the silver and the bronze and then the iron legs that this bronze kingdom, which represents the kingdom of Greece, isn't the last one, and there's going to be more. So this is talking about somehow or another a dual fulfillment in Antiochus Epiphanes, but then something farther into the end. Kind of confusing, I admit that. Takes a little bit of mental gymnastics to figure it out. And verse 20, it says, "The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the king of Media and Persia." Okay, thanks for that clue, Gabriel. And now we know the correlation between the statue and the four beasts and now this ram. And then verse 21, the shaggy goat. There we pick it up, the shaggy goat. Represents the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king we know as Alexander the Great. The broken horn, the broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. And I read extensively to you from Dr. Whitcomb's book on Daniel, and it was helpful to you, I believe, as it was to me. And then it says in verse 23, "In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue." That's that small horn. "His power will be mighty, but not his own power." That's interesting. There's something behind him that's helping him. "And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree, and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people." So now it's bringing in things that have to do with Israel. You know, Israel is in the forefront of the news, and I've been following it intensively as Hamas has been attacking them. And it makes me think about the things of the end times, though I don't think we're quite there, but we are in the latter days. And we see the vestiges of the hate and the desire to eliminate and attack Israel. And the stage is set for the mental processes that men must have to be at war with Israel and the toughness they have to resist them. And it says here in verse 25, and through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence, and he will magnify himself in his heart, and he will destroy many while they are at ease, peace and safety. Very shrewd, you see. And he will even oppose the Prince of Princes. That's Jesus Christ, my friends. But he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and the mornings which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. Then I got up again and carried on the king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it. Daniel couldn't explain it, and there wasn't anybody else that could help him. It was basically a vision that was a dead end for him at this time, and he couldn't quite understand it. Now we look back at it with 2020 vision. We see what happened in the histories. We see the Antiochus Epiphanes, and then we see the parallel of how he acted with a future great king or shrewd person, a small little horn that becomes dominating. And so this is going to be just an incredible thing. Now, just a couple comments about this. Some of the language seems to transcend just talking about normal people. There's different viewpoints on whether this is a dual fulfillment, fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes' life, and then that foreshadows the Antichrist at the end. I'm of that persuasion. There's, as some say, it could be looked at as a typology, just as there's types of Christ in the Old Testament. There's types of the Antichrist foreboding his coming. And, the Passover lamb is a type of Christ. The scapegoat is a type of Christ. You have the sacrifice of Isaac, where he's taken up on the Mount Moriah, which we think is Calvary, and he's going to be sacrificed by his father. And God stops him and says, I will provide a substitute. And that is a precursor or proto-evangelism of Christ dying on the cross. As Jonah in the whale, as Jonah is in the belly of the whale or the sea monster 3 days and 3 nights, so too must the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. So there's hundreds of these types in the Old Testament pointing to something in the future. And this could be that, or a dual fulfillment, which could also be the case. And it talks about this interfering in the sacrifice on the altar, and we pick up something about that again in Daniel chapter 9 with a different type of imagery. And it says here in verse 27, and he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, that's 7 years. But in the middle of the week, 3.5 years, I'm doing the math for you, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, on the wings of abomination will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. And so there's this abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And although Antiochus Epiphanes did something like that, sacrificing a sow on the altar, there is this future abomination of desolation with the fourth kingdom, the Roman kingdom, and it is yet future. And it's yet future even when Jesus Christ comes upon the scene. And he mentions this in Matthew chapter 24. And it says here in Matthew 24, and starting with verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things which are in the house, etc. For there will be a great tribulation, verse 21, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. And so this is yet future, even now, the abomination of desolation. There are some that said, oh, that happened, and confusing the faith of some. No, it has not happened. Something like it has happened with Antiochus Epiphanes IV, foreshadowing this. But this has not happened. This is the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And so there's a lot going on here. And there will come a time when Israel will rebuild that temple. They're in the land right now. They've got a group of people that are wanting to get the temple up. They're trying to get the beginning of it with a red heifer. They have that red heifer in Israel now. Has to be born there. Has to be 3 years old. They've got the makings of having that sacrifice of the red heifer. And that starts the holy process of getting everything sanctified, and they can set up the temple. They've got temple articles already made. They can put that thing up as soon as they have permission, just lickety-split. And so we are very, very close to this end times. When that temple gets set up, there's going to come a time about Israel's going to want peace so desperately. They'll make a firm covenant with supposedly a savior who's going to be very shrewd. He's going to double cross them. He's going to come into that temple. He's going to make himself out to be God. By this time, he'll have been assassinated and come back to life, and he'll have God status. And he'll demand that everybody worship him. And he'll come into that temple and display himself as being God, sitting down in the Holy of Holies and claiming himself to be God. Friends, it's getting very close. There are things that are in place, and the rapture is going to happen before that tribulation period, and that could happen now. Be ready, my friend. Know the Lord Jesus Christ, and thank God we're not going to be here during that time of great tribulation.